All right, y'all. Welcome to what is actually going to happen with New York City's organic waste. We are joined here today by some wonderful panelists. My name is Dior St. Hilaire, and I currently chair the Bronx Swab. Very excited to be here today. And so just to kind of give some kind of kickoff remarks, we're really excited about this bill, as we know that community composting and just composting really just in general has been really vulnerable to cuts based on the budget. And so this bill, Intro 244, has been really, really impactful for making sure that we have something that is actually in law to ensure that collection will happen regardless of what's happening with the budget. It's in the bill now. It needs to be recycled like metal, glass, and plastic, and just like paper. And so just wanted to say a huge thanks to everyone that went to kind of champion this bill and really got behind it. One of the things that I do want to point out is that it is less of a composting bill and more of a collection bill. And I think it's important for us to denote that when we're talking about this. It's important, yes, that we have that to be protected for collecting it, but I think it's even equally more as important for us to understand the importance of composting and community composting in bringing this bill. So what's great is that, you know, in the zero waste legislation, what was passed was Intro 281B, which basically tried to have some sort of protections around drop-off sites and community composting facilities. While that is a step in the right direction, I think that it's really clear that when we're talking about climate concerns, that we don't centralize everything. And when we're thinking about the importance of community in this conversation, and also getting New York City residents to participate, it's important that we understand the value that community composting has, and composting really just in general, and bringing communities together, as well as improving the health of our soils. There's so many different benefits of them. And in tonight's discussion, you're going to be able to hear from many different people and many different stakeholders, the different paths to where these organics will end up and why it's actually important for us. I think a lot of the composting efforts that have happened over the years, we don't want to fall to the wayside because we're trying to centralize or aggregate, you know, this sort of feedstock in a large way. And so the questions, right? Like, how much of it is it actually being composted? How much of it is actually going to the anaerobic digester? And that's exactly what it is that we're going to be discussing here tonight. I think it's important for us as a city to actually understand the best way to process these materials. What's really great and really special is that organizations like BK Rot has kind of championed what does it look like to actually process these things locally, so that it doesn't have to travel very far, and that not only is it processed locally within the community, that it also is able to be used by the local community. So I don't want us to kind of miss that. And we also have the CLCPA that has some really, really aggressive climate goals. So again, we want to make sure that we're having this conversation from many different angles, that we understand the importance of the people in this process, that we understand the importance of the community benefit. We need folks to actually participate in this. And part of what is going to get us there is them having a connection with the soil, them having a connection with what's actually happening with this process. And so the SWABs look forward to working with the Department of Sanitation, with the mayor's office, with DEP, as we make very, very important decisions about how we actually process this organic material and what's collected in this Intro 244A. So just want to say thank you to everybody that's on the line, that we again keep composting at our heart when thinking about community organics. We've done a lot in this fight with Save Our Compost, with a lot of other organizations that exist. And we really want to make sure that we're bringing in all New York City residents into this conversation so that they really understand what it is that's happening, what's going on, and the benefits of what's going to be going on this evening. So Claire, I'll kick it back to you, and thank all of you for being present today.
Thanks, Dior. That was a great introduction, and really excited about this panel too. So let me share my screen, which seems to have stopped, as I was trying to enable the chat for you all, but we're trying to work on that, but hopefully that'll get started. Wait. Sorry for this technical malfunction here. Let me just restart my screen sharing. So everybody can see the screen okay now, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm going to just start by previewing the amount of waste and where it's going to now. And then we have three panelists talking about three different processes. We have Justin Green, who's talking about community composting. We have Franciosi, who's talking about municipal scale composting. And we have Jane Gajwani, who's talking about anaerobic digestion, municipal scale again. And then we're going to have a panel moderated by Sandy Nurse. So we're really talking about Department of Sanitation waste, and that means DSNY, they collect from residences, nature institutions, city properties, and some parks. They don't collect from commercial businesses. So they collect about 3 million tons of waste a year, and of that, about 1 million of it is organic waste, which could be composted. It's compostable waste, but only currently about 2.5% of it actually gets separated from trash. Most of this part of the pie chart goes in the trash. And on the commercial side, there are some rules that they have to separate food waste. It's again about 1 million tons of food waste every year, but only the larger haulers or chains are mandated to separate food scraps. So yeah, so we're talking about the residential institutional side of the pie. And how does that get separated? As we all know, there's a range of ways. You can drop off your food scraps like at a farmer's market or a food scrap drop off. You can drop it off in these new smart bins. You can have it picked up curbside if you're in Queens, and it will be citywide by the end of next year. And then there's seasonal pickups. So there are these different ways, and here it shows the orange are the smart bins, the green are the food scrap drop-offs, and these are the areas that are currently receiving brown bin service. And so we put together this Sankey diagram to really try and give a picture of what was collected. It's a snapshot of the calendar year 2022, what was collected, and every one of these the width of this represents the amount of tons collected. So this was 2022, there was almost 30,000 tons collected. Some of it was collected curbside or smart bins. There was the seasonal leave and Christmas tree collections. Schools is a large part of it, the organics program, and then the New York compost project partners. And so for this, it's pretty simple. It just goes direct to their compost sites. But for the other pickups, some go to these transfer stations where woody debris is screened out before the rest goes to anaerobic co-digestion. In this case, Newtown Creek is the largest facility. There's also one in Massachusetts. And then some is screened out of these larger processes and goes to landfill. And for anaerobic digestion, it ends up as mainly energy, but as biogas, but some solids, and compost ends up as compost. And there are a few sites that don't go to, aren't really collected. Soundview and Cunningham Parks that didn't show up because the data is done differently, and food scraps on Rikers Island that Department of Sanitation also manage. And this shows where everything happens. Newtown Creek here, Pine Island Farm are the two anaerobic digestion places. Staten Island is the only municipal compost facility in the city at the moment, and some goes to Nature's Choice in New Jersey. And then these small ones are the New York Compost Project community compost sites. And of course, there are many other small composting sites. These are the ones that fall under the New York City Community Compost Project that the Department of Sanitation fund. So just stepping back a second, like, what do we mean by organic waste? All these things are organic waste, and different processes and are better suited to different types of organic waste. For instance, composting does very well with yard waste. Anaerobic digestion doesn't. But anaerobic digestion does great with fats, oils, and greases, and compost doesn't like it so much. So there is some kind of variation on what can go in what type of process. And then there's the compostable products. I mean, compostable plastics get screened out pretty much everywhere, apart from earth matter, as far as I know, because in the big facilities, you can't tell if that's compostable or not. And then earth matter in Governor's Island have a different process where they shred it, but generally, these are the only ones that get processed. These get screened off. And some places do even have dog waste composting, but generally you're not allowed to include it. And then sewage is a separate system. Obviously, it's never part of composting, but it does go in stormwater for anaerobic digestion. And I mean, it is, you can have composting toilets, but not within our compost system. So just an overview, this is showing community composting. It's what we know in all the farmers market drop-offs or other drop-offs, gets mixed with leaves, composted with a lot of volunteers being involved, parks waste as well, to some extent, is sometimes, as Justin will talk about, mixed into community composting. And then there's a lot of education and stewardship and compost used within the city for street tree planting or parks and initiatives like that. Municipal composting takes waste that comes from the curbside pickup as well, and it's a larger scale process shown here with all these bags of compost afterwards. Some goes to the clean soil bank too. And then anaerobic digestion. I'm sure many of you have seen these digester eggs at Newtown Creek, where it's mixed with sewage. Again, the plastics and things are screened out, and there's biogas and land application of the solids. So the question is, you know, how much more organic waste is the city going to collect? By fall next year, all the boroughs are going to have curbside collection. And thanks to Sandy's bill that just passed, it's going to be mandatory. Not just yard waste, but food scrap separation will be mandatory. So citywide we'll be collecting. That's a huge increase in the amount of food scraps. And how will we process is the question. At the moment, the funding's looking like they're maybe reducing funding for food scrap drop-offs and community composting. And really, I think there's a place for everything. And you'll learn tonight that there's real benefits to all types of these processes. Also, seeing how they tie into our goals. New York City has some great goals in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, reducing 80% by 2050. But we have also just done these consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions, because previously we only really talked about the methane in the landfill, but now we're talking about all the emissions from food, which is produced upstream. And if we do reduce food waste 50%, that amount there could be about 3 million metric tons. If we save that food scraps, we save that food from being wasted, it's a huge impact on reducing emissions. And so reducing wasted food is the most important thing to do, even before any of these processes, both for carbon and just so people can eat it, because 2/3 of it is potentially edible or not buy it in the first place. Looking at the whole waste stream, we have this larger zero waste goal that the new council member bills passed will require the city to come up with a plan and targets to get to zero waste and have to report on them every year. This is back from when we did the zero waste design guidelines and the designing waste exhibit, and it shows the amount of waste that was being diverted in 2015. And to get a lot of tons of organic waste that weren't being separated. Things haven't really changed from this picture today. But to get to zero waste, this is one way we made up. Like if you half all the recyclable waste by 50%, if you divert 90% of everything, reduce non-divertible trash by 80%, then you could get to zero waste. And then we'd still have 700,000 tons a year about of organics to deal with. So we still have to really ramp up. And as you hear the panelists add say some of the issues to consider in the different processes are really about, what types of waste, how convenient is it, how much contamination is it, are there lots of opportunities for education engagement, how much do people participate, all these kind of things. What are the processing, how easy will it be to site a lot of these extra processing, and what are the beneficial uses. So all those things we'll get into details of. One thing we've been looking at is like, how could you make sure all of the soils in New York City are healthy? Healthy soils are so much better for the city. They absorb like 6 times more rainwater. They keep it cooler. They keep our trees and plants healthier. But how much could the city really take in terms of food scraps for making healthy soils? And on our initial estimates, it's looking like if we said we want to apply an inch of compost to about a quarter of all the landscaped areas in the city, it actually could potentially use up all the residential organic waste. So there is a real need for compost in the city. And it would require, in terms of space, about 1% of the landscaped area. So using food scraps to make compost to regenerate soils in all our green spaces is a real opportunity. Obviously, it's a different process, community composting. It requires people often to drop off, or have different ways to make sure we can take all types of food scraps, but there is real potential here. And this diagram on the right just shows, obviously, it's going to be easier to do in terms of space in the greener outer boroughs here than it will be in denser neighborhoods where there isn't enough green space to accommodate all the compost. And there are some additional options here that we're not presenting individually. Justin will talk a little bit about some of these other community compost, like Compost Power or BK Rot, or there are other systems that are put like in Battery Park City, where there's stuff that's composted on site with leaves and yard waste as part of the maintenance of the park. And then equipment in large buildings, which can either just squeeze out the water or actually can make a fertilizer and can make it easier for larger buildings to deal with compost. So that's just a quick overview. And now I'm going to introduce Justin Green from Big Reuse to tell you a little bit more about community composting.
Thanks everyone for having me. Thanks for the swabs for helping to organize this, and Clare, Miflin, and Anna Sachs especially. And thanks for all the panelists joining. We've been at Big Reuse, we've been part of a larger movement across the city of community composting since 2011. And we launched as a response to the city not really having options for composting. And as environmentalists and gardeners and community advocates, basically started launching our own composting sites wherever we could find space, in community gardens, underneath bridges, all over the city. And this was supported and sort of pushed forward through the Department of Sanitation, who actually invested, as they were looking at rolling out curbside, we're investing in these community groups like Big Reuse, Lower East Side, Earth Matter, the Botanical Gardens, Grow NYC, Snug Harbor, and training composters, master composter, and then eventually funding community compost scale sites at a few locations throughout the city. Next. So we were part of sort of a community composting movement that is not only in New York City, but is across the country, even across the world, where residents have the ability to sort of step up and take responsibility for their waste. You know, you can't really do that with paper or aluminum or plastic, but you can do that with composting. And I think that motivated a lot of us, and motivated a lot of gardeners just to improve the soil that was they were trying to garden in. And so this led to, and in partnership with the Department of Sanitation Compost Project, of real expansion in the city, and sort of became a model that other municipalities, other organizations around the country really were admired. And it also helped the city move forward in terms of composting. So as we worked in the community, involved, hundreds and thousands of volunteers, gave people places to drop off, it really started to inspire a larger effort. So what you'll see in, as I think everyone's pretty aware of how it works, but the food scrap drop-offs organized at the community level. They can be at farmers market with paid staff. They can be at community gardens organized by volunteers, and either composted in those community gardens. There are like over 200 community composting sites throughout the city, or when a lot of times when those drop-offs, especially during COVID or prior, this really got overwhelmed with people bringing their food scraps. The compost project organizations would partner to pick up the food scraps that have been dropped off. So here is Nurture BK, Flatbush, Brooklyn, where volunteers organizing, and it's one of our sites that we pick up. But Lower East Side, Borough, NYC, the Botanical Gardens, and Earth Matter, among a bunch of other different organizations. Like so many popped up over COVID, with all these people really excited about making sure the food scraps didn't end up in the landfill. Next. Then you see some of the processing start to happen on site, where we're putting them in toters. Next. Here's us hauling back to our site underneath the Queensboro Bridge. Next. Dumping out the food scraps to be mixed with parks, leaf and yard waste, which is also really key. You can see it in action, where we've partnered with parks. So over the years, really working closely with operations in Western Queens parks, we started raking the leaves ourselves 10 years ago with volunteers and hauling it by bike or by truck to a site. And then parks operations got on board and started hauling with us and partnering with us. So really helped us scale by bringing us all their leaves and wood chips. Here under the Queensboro Bridge, we're on aerated static piles, which make sure that the compost is composting efficiently and not giving off odors, by making sure it has enough air, enough oxygen, so it doesn't go anaerobic, which is when it gets smelly. And this was all built out with Department of Sanitation and city funding. Another really innovative way that they helped community composters that were part of this effort scale up their operations. And the system we're actually using here is a system the city eventually used is installing in Staten Island and Fresh Kills as they scale up that site. Next. Here's just testing the temperature to make sure we're killing off all the bad microbes and weed seeds. Next. And here is us screening it before it goes out. We take unscreened and put it on street trees, but we take the screen for gardens and parks. Queens Parks Horticulture uses a lot of our compost for their seed starts. So it's we're using the leaves and yard waste from parks to start their plants that they're going to put back into the parks. This whole movement been around since the 90s, and it started with Lower East Side Ecology Center. Christina Datz Romero and Clyde Romero started composting and picking up at Union Square and composting on abandoned sites in Lower East Side, and really sort of set created the model that we all looked at and were inspired by as we sought to create organic waste options in our communities. Next. So at Lower East Side scaled up, and now they're hauling over 1 million pounds of food scraps from sites all over the city, and they are coordinating the master composter with the Botanical Gardens with 650 participants last year alone. And this all builds, it's such a community effort that builds towards more composting and more participation and more community involvement and knowledge at community gardens and schools and universities that really enables people, empowers them to take action on this waste issue, environmental waste issue that's necessary. Earth Matter is another early organization that started up. I have an amazing site on Governor's Island if you haven't been there. They have so many volunteers and participants come through every year. It's right in the middle of Governor's Island with chickens and great apprenticeship programs and interns. And they're part of a zero waste island effort at Governor's Island to get all the organic waste from Governor's Island composted. So a real model and an effective model for making sure none of the organics have to leave the island. They're all composted right there. The material can be used on the island, or often they're partnering with Green Thumb to haul a lot of it off and distribute it out to the rest of the city. But also a great way that they organize. Here's our Queensbridge site from overhead. Next. This is what it was before. So another benefit of these, community composting efforts is a lot of them have taken in really underutilized areas and turned them into real productive sites, community sites that are making soil to build the community, to green the community. Next. Here's our site. Again, and the salt lot in Gajwani was sort of an abandoned site on the edge of the Gajwani. Through participatory budgeting, we got funding to build it out, and it's a solar powered aerated static pile system that composts 600,000 pounds annually. All that compost also goes back out, to hundreds of community groups from both of our sites. Next. Grow NYC has been a key part of the compost project efforts, from running collection sites at their farmers markets and other sites and engaging people at the food scrap drop-offs and educating them about composting. I know it inspired a lot of people to get involved, to get excited about composting. Just every time that at the farmers market, they say, oh, I could bring my food scraps here. Next. Also, another really influential initial composter that's still going strong was the Red Hook Compost Initiative, started by David Buckle. And it's the largest human-powered composting site. So it's all, most of it anyway is driven by volunteer labor, just turning it over and turning over tons and tons of material a year. And they're integrated into the Red Hook Community Farm. So a lot of the soil compost goes back into powering the community farm and on parks land, and volunteer driven. So another amazing sort of example of, composting and this really innovative Department of Sanitation program that has led to so many great projects across the city. Next. BK Rott, Dior and Sandy Nurse are both connected to BK Rott, real inspiring social enterprise to employ youth of color. And it's bike powered, composting 100 tons a year, and just servicing Bushwick community that did not have a site, did not have a community composting option. And they also, took it, the community came together, banded together, not only started composting, but created an employment opportunity and made a social enterprise. So a really exciting option there too. Next. Compost Power. And Domingo Morales, who's sort of become almost the face of a lot of New York's composting work, started off at Red Hook and branched out, started Compost Power, which is a social enterprise, building sites with Green City Forest on NYCHA property, and with a real focus of reaching out to disadvantaged, underserved, marginalized communities, and engaging those communities through Green City Forest and other job opportunities. Next, one of the benefits of community composting is the compost goes right back into the community. It's a resource recovered. It's recovered locally. It's not. It is more sustainable because it's right here. We're doing it right here. There's not a lot of trucking involved, and it's done right in the community. Goes right back into the community. Improves the soils. Here's some of our distribution. I don't have everyone's distribution map, but here's just a few of or here are some of the sites we distributed to last year. The list on the left is not complete, but it shows you how many sites just our big reuses sites alone have reached. Next. And one of the great uses of compost is bringing out sort of unsifted compost with a lot of woody material in it and applying it to street trees. Something we've been really into doing this year and other years, but gotten really into in partnership with a lot of council members, Councilmember Nurse, Councilmember Hanif, and others. And I think, as we get into more street tree planting, it's something we're really excited about, is using that compost in street tree planting. Next. With community composting, the part that's sort of harder to put a number to or put a budget around or value around is the community engagement that we've all seen. I mean, all of us that have been involved at all these levels have seen the transformations, the ability for people to really engage in effort of affecting their environment and reducing their waste and helping their community. And so many other connections and community empowerment and education that are hard to quantify and put a number to when we're looking at larger scale, more efficient solutions. One of the real effective ways that the city is funded is Master Composter course, which has trained so many of us that have been working in the field and on the sort of ins and outs of composting, made lots of composting experts out there in the city. Next. And this is some of the work we're doing in support of the organic waste collection, curbside organic waste collection. Thank you all. That's great. I'm done there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Justin. And Frank, you're up next. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to thank everybody for inviting me to speak, and kudos to go out to Justin and big reuse of a award winner, a small composter facilities of the year. I believe it was a couple years ago, and also Jody Cologne, who was one of the first pioneers there in New York City. And let me just say this: the community part of composting is very, very important, because that connection that people make with the earth and closing the loop. So I'll also say that all forms of compost are beneficial, and that there's not one size that fits all, and that the combination of doing both small scale, medium scale, large scale is really going to be important for everybody to understand this, because it's a huge issue, and even AD, all that is part of it too as well. So just a little bit on a U.S. Composting Council. We've been around for a long time, since 1990. A lot of that was driven from yard waste bans across the country. This is our mission statement and our vision statement. Next slide. So what's driving this, both internationally and nationally? Some of the international drivers are both the United Nations Food and Ag Organization and their goals, their sustainability goals. And when I talk about food waste, I really don't talk about food waste. Obviously, food rescue comes before food scrap. What I'm talking about is food scrap, stuff that we can't feed to animals, can't feed to rescue, and feed to humans. The other national drivers that we're seeing is USDA and EPA reducing the goal of reducing food waste about 50% by 2030. The clock is ticking on that. So I think it's urgent that things start getting built and put in place so they can meet these goals. Next slide. So another organization is ReFed. This is a nonprofit organization just looking at really statistics on food waste and how to avoid it, how to rescue it, and then what do you do with what's left over. So composting is important, an important part of that. Centralized composting could basically take 5.3 million tons of food scrap annually from landfills. By doing so, reducing 2.6 million tons of greenhouse gases while creating over 9,000 jobs. What we don't see in their figures is the use of compost, which is another important environmental benefit. I'll get to that towards the end of my presentation. Next slide. So what is centralized, medium or large scale composting? These are some examples of it. And usually you'll see these within a 50-mile radius of a large metro area. Obviously, you need some land mass for some of these larger facilities, but it is modular. A lot of these facilities are being built where they can be added on. You're seeing a lot of other methods and equipment that are entering our area. Next slide, please. So one method is the static pile method. Basically, pile it up, let it rot, right? That's okay if you have the space and if you don't have odor issues. When you're looking at strictly something like yard waste, it's really an easy way to break down. It's a very slow process. The composting process needs to have moisture. It needs to have air, and a lot of that air is passive through the particle size in the pile. And then your off-gassing of air or carbon dioxide. You do get heat, which is a benefit of sterilizing or killing some of the detrimental microbes, and you also get water vapor. So those are the important things. So when you look at those factors and being able to control some of those factors, you get more into an industrial or commercial type of composting. Next slide. So turn windrow is probably one of the most prolific ways of composting. You see this a lot out in where you have yard waste centers. Again, a lot of different types of benefits. You can see this on the farm. Space is an issue where you have the picture on the left. You need to maintain an aisle space for that tractor to pull that turner down. The picture on the right is what they call a strato turner, where the windrows are toe to toe. But even so, both of these methods here will need a significant amount of land mass. This is just a picture showing that you can compost up in the northern part of our country. This is the Shakopee Indian Reservation up in Minnesota, where they compost year round. They take a lot of the food scrap from the metropolitan area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Next slide. Aerated static pile, Justin talked about this. Again, this could be done several different ways. On the left, you see more of a large scale operation where they have the piping running underneath the piles. It's important that you maintain pile porosity in the pile so the air will percolate either up or through the piles. And on the right, what you see is actually aerated static pile. It looks very decorative because it's on a horse farm and they're taking horse manure. But under that, all that pretty barnyard look is the piping and the manifolds and the biofilters and all that. So just another way of looking at it. So what you see here is the facility out in Staten Island. I believe this is almost ready to be commissioned. It is an aerated static pile system, concrete bunkers, and then also going to biofilters. So this is currently taking all the food scrap that you see that on the map that Claire showed you earlier on the commercial side. But again, it is sited near businesses, near facilities, and we hope to see this open, I believe, in the next couple of months. Next slide. So this is just a diagram showing you what forced aeration looks like. There's different ways of aerating. You can aerate positively by pushing air through the pile, and then you can also aerate negatively, which is pulling air through the pile. And then some of these systems are able to be bidirectional, and there is some advantages for both positive and negative aeration. Having them bi-directional is really important when you're looking at stuff like maintaining moisture, odor control, and making sure your temperatures are in line. And a lot of this has gotten to be automated by temperature thermocoupler feedbacks, timers, and so forth. So can be very. This is a diagram of negative aeration. Again, you're pulling air through the pile. You do generate condensate water because when you pull through, you're pulling moisture through the pile. But this also can, all the off-gasking can go to a biofilter. These are some areas of covered systems, and you'll see this probably out Staten Island. There's different types. There's impermeable, there's microporous, and then you could just use wood chips as a layer, and then there's also fleece covers. Next slide, please. This just shows you how biofilter, the area to the left, you see this is an ECS system where they're pulling it negatively and sending it to a biofilter. Biofilter is basically wood chip material to the left, which controls the odor issues. Next slide. Turn aerated static pile. You don't see a lot of these where the aeration is coming from the bottom floor, usually a concrete pad, and they'll actually move the pile. So it's a combination of aeration and then moving the pile and moving it closer towards finished product and then curing. Next slide, please. This is just an aerial photograph of the Phoenix facility where it was being built. You can see a pretty large footprint here for this type of system and this method. Next slide. These are some examples of in vessel. When you look at different size systems, these can go in the back of schools. They can go in universities. What you see there in the bottom picture is an in vessel system that is handling actually material from a slaughterhouse plant. So again, these could be also biofiltered and aerated, and it's a turning drum. And the one up in the top left is a Green Mountain system, which they have an auger system that turns it. And again, that's going to a biofilter. Next slide. Agitated bay systems, you don't see these that much anymore. They were popular in the 90s, all under house in a building, aerated, but also turned. We see some biosolids facilities that are still using this. And most of this is done all through just electric blowers. Next slide. So why is it important to look at composting and composting and compost the product? Composting is one way of avoiding the greenhouse gas, but using compost in the soil also sequesters carbon. So all these benefits that you get from producing a product and using that product locally reduces the carbon footprint. But also, if you look at the soils in the city, and Claire talked about it earlier, adding more infiltration by increasing the organic matter in the soils is really important. We're seeing a lot of green infrastructure going in. You'll see it also coined as green blue infrastructure. And a lot of that has to do with stormwater capturing. As you know, we're having these extreme climate events. And when you look around the city now, you see green roofs. That green roof has compost in it. When you look at biofilters and biofiltration along areas along the coastlines around the city, you see projects with what they call engineered soils, which are a mixture of compost and different types of aggregate to increase infiltration into the ground. New York City has a combined sewer stormwater flow. And when you have extreme rain events like a thunderstorm, where you get 10 inches of rain in 10 hours, the wastewater treatment plants cannot handle the combined flow of both sewer and stormwater, and that gets released into the rivers surrounding the city. So it's really important to capture rain events, and green infrastructure is a way to do that. And the big thing that we're seeing now is we want our cities to be more climate resilient, and climate resiliency is something that is in the topic of every large city. Next slide. So this is just a good diagram showing the effect of having green infrastructure in place, where you have green roofs and you have streets that are draining to infiltration and bioswales. And it's really important also from a cooling effect, having that green there. From an aesthetic viewpoint, having green there, but multi-purpose, having parks for wildlife and also for leisure. Anything being green is going to benefit the environment from multiple standpoints, from temperature to having oxygen and also capturing extreme rain events. I believe that's my last slide.
Yes, it is. Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Frank. That was such a good, thorough overview of everything anybody might want to know about how to compost at municipal scale. And now we have Jane talking about anaerobic digestion. Thank you, Jane.
Hello, everybody. I am Jane Gajwani. I work for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And I think most of you are familiar with DEP, but we're the largest water and wastewater utility in North America. And we have a regulatory arm that's responsible for the air code and hazardous waste and noise as well. But we only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to dive right into this. So anaerobic digestion is really kind of the centerpiece of how DEP is able to recycle all the resources it takes in through waste streams. In an anaerobic digestion system, organic material is heated to about 98 degrees Fahrenheit and fed into enclosed concrete and metal vessels in an oxygen-free environment. There's various microorganisms that break down the organic mass through a controlled multi-stage process that results in about half of the organic material converting to biogas, which is a renewable fuel, and the remainder, which is known as digestate, is nutrient-rich and can be composted or used as a soil amendment known as biosolids. And then this whole digestion process takes about 15 to 20 days. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this is DEP's system. DEP's Bureau of Wastewater Treatment operates 14 wastewater resource recovery facilities spread across the 5 boroughs. You can see them in those white circles with numbers inside. Each one of these wastewater resource recovery facilities have anaerobic digesters to recycle the byproduct organic sludges that the wastewater treatment process creates, and it recycles them into valuable resources such as biogas and biosolids. DEP actually operates 75 digesters across all 5 boroughs. And to go along with this, we have decades and decades of experience handling large organic waste streams. Next slide, please. Thank you. So since 2016, DEP has also been digesting source-separated organics composed of food waste and yard waste. I think that you're all pretty familiar with the intricacies and challenges of source separation and collection. So I'll kind of dive right into the specifics of our program. For the material that's routed to co-digestion, it is first brought to a facility that's operated by Waste Management, and they remove contamination in their 5-step process. It's important to note that they've seen contamination levels of up to 20%. I think they're averaging around 18% right now. And this 5-step process is really effective at being able to remove contamination. By the time it reaches us, there's essentially no contamination left. After they remove the contamination, they grind it up. We need a pumpable slurry in order, because our anaerobic digestion system is a wet process. And so they grind it up. They thin it with calorific liquids such as expired milk or off-spec energy drinks. One thing that they do that's really interesting and I think is great is that they also dilute it with grease trap waste, which is one of these materials that's pretty difficult to recycle because it's watery and oily, but that's actually terrific for the anaerobic digestion system. And then that gets sent to DEP in enclosed vector trucks, which keep nuisances at bay. It gets delivered, 6 to 8 times a day through these trucks, and then it's released into the digesters at a steady stream, because that's the microorganisms like to have a steady food stream. And things that we've learned, don't go forward yet, go back for a sec. Things that we've learned is that food waste and sewage sludges digest well at the same temperatures and the same retention times. This may seem surprising at first, but when you actually take a step back and think about it, that most of the organic material that DEP receives through wastewater also originated as food. So in fact, these waste streams are very similar to each other. Food waste is also mostly water, and the proper handling of water is important, and that is something that DEP specializes in. So in this digestion process, more than 75% of the food waste converts to renewable biogas. So if you recall, I had mentioned that the sewage sludges, about 50% of that converts to biogas. We're really seeing much more enhanced conversion, much more digestibility of food waste than the conventional sludges, and so we're able to produce quite a bit of biogas. Next slide, please. Thank you. So why should we co-digest? You know, what is it? You know, what is it about co-digestion? Why do we believe that this should be part of the solution for New York City organics? So thinking about some of the pain points that we have in composting and other organics treatment, there are solutions that co-digestion is able to answer. So here's a few examples. First, as I had mentioned, that New York City is seeing a wide range of contamination levels in its source separated organics. You know, I had mentioned that, you know, waste management is seeing 20%. I'm sure there's other waste streams that are actually much lower. But co-digestion, because it requires pre-processing and because it's a liquid pre-processing, it is actually really, really effective at getting contamination out. And so, you know, as I mentioned, you know, we've run tests on the material that we're receiving, and there's virtually no contamination by the time it reaches us. Another thing to consider, you know, as mentioned previously, is that fats, oils, grease, meat, and dairy aren't accepted at most composting facilities. These are all materials that are compatible with digestion. Fats in particular have a really high energy content and almost completely convert to biogas. Composting is rather land intensive, and you know, I know that we're talking about reducing the total amount of food waste that we have, and that's terrific, and we really, really need that. But currently, you know, between both the residential, schools, and commercial sector, there's about 4,000 tons per day of food waste. That is a lot of land area for all composting. Although co-digestion, you know, requires non-trivial retention times, just like composting, we are able to go vertical. So the process is much more material within a smaller footprint. Plus, we have these digesters already. The 75 digesters that are already part of our facilities, we are building new ones in Hunts Point to replace older digesters that are at the end of their useful life. But generally, this is all infrastructure that we already own and that we need for our wastewater treatment, and it's something that we can leverage to help the city handle large amounts of organic material. And lastly, something to consider is that the supply should not exceed demand. Right. So New York City is working very hard to divert as much organic material as possible from landfills, and that includes food waste, yard waste, parkland waste, biosolids. And so, you know, we're trying to find beneficial uses for all of this material and trying to get it all out of landfills. But keep in mind that all of this is happening within the context of New York State is doing exactly the same thing, maybe on a different time scale, but they are doing the same thing as our neighboring states. Right. And so there's a lot of material that is looking for land to be applied for. And in my estimation, if we compost all of this, we may face challenges on exactly where all this material should go. One of the things that co-digestion offers, because we have a 75% reduction in the mass, and when it's converted to biogas, then that leaves only 25% of the mass that needs to find beneficial use outlets. And you know, and we also can make different types of products. Next slide. We just worked with a company called Northern Tilt. They completed a study, and we're still under review. So please keep in mind that this is draft. But they looked at the different carbon intensities of various endpoints for source separated organics. So the column on the left is the carbon intensity of landfilling, and I think I actually had seen this in the Q&A. Somebody was asking about this. You can see the carbon intensity of landfilling undigested organics, and this is per metric ton of source separated organics. The next column over is compost, and then followed by 3 different configurations of anaerobic digestion. So anaerobic digestion, where all of the biosolids go to landfill, but all of the biogas is used beneficially. And then the last 2 columns are for all of the biogas going to beneficial use, plus all of the biosolids going to beneficial use, either as compost or going straight to land application. And so what you'll notice here is all of these solutions are net carbon negative, right? And they all have a huge impact. Like the first and foremost, what we need to do is get all of this material out of landfills, right? That is the single biggest thing that we can do. And then all of these alternatives are net carbon negative. And so they really are helping the environment on the whole and helping mitigate the worst effects of climate change. Next slide. Thank you. But this is taken from Plan NYC, which was just released in April. New York City is really thinking about circular economy in general, and specifically, where we come in is part of an organic circular economy. We believe that, in this vision, it includes both wastewater treatment processes and composting, so co-digestion and composting. And we don't think that these need to be, competing technologies. We really think that they can be complementary processes, with anaerobic digestion being able to take material that is traditionally more difficult to compost, such as fats, oils, and grease, and then also taking highly contaminated source-separated organic streams. And so the next 2 slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the beneficial use of the residuals from anaerobic digestion, namely biogas and biosolids. So there's a lot of use for biogas, right? So we capture all the biogas that's created, we capture that, and then it can be used as a replacement for natural gas. So we traditionally used it on site at various facilities, but we're about 3/4 of the way through a carbon and energy neutrality study and have identified that the highest and best use of our biogas to be renewable biogas to offsite use. And this is kind of an interesting concept, but it is important to keep in mind that each molecule of biogas that's exported equates to an equal number of molecules of fracked gas that's not being taken out of the ground in order to meet natural gas demand. This is really an interesting time in energy planning, with plans for the electrical grid to rapidly convert to all renewable energy, which is great. And that process, that kind of conversion facilitates, all of us converting our heating needs to our conventional heating needs to electrification via efficient heat pump technology. And we are definitely going to be seeing a mass conversion to heating electrification over the next decade or so, which is great for greenhouse gas emissions and for local air quality. But there does remain a certain niche users that will still need the higher temperatures achieved by combustion that are really difficult to achieve via heat pumps. So, for example, the Pratt paper facility, which recycles all of the paper that New York City space paper, their recycling process is a high temperature application, and they work to make their process as efficient as possible, but they're still facing really significant fines under Local Law 97. But DEP's biogas could be used to meet that heating need. And maybe this is just temporary. Maybe it's just until heat pump technology is able to achieve higher temperatures, until that technology develops. But right now, they could be using the biogas as a 1-for-1 replacement for natural gas. And so just really to reiterate, there's 2 important points here. Our biogas production is a tiny fraction of current natural gas usage. There's no scenario where we're producing so much biogas that this will initiate further expansion or investment in the natural gas grid. And also, because our biogas production is so low, there's no way that this will supplant initiatives by the city and the state to electrify heating needs. Pretty much everybody is going to need to electrify their heating needs over the next decade. We want our biogas to be routed to the hardest to electrify users, the folks that will otherwise be the very, very last users to be able to stop using fossil gas. Next slide, please. So next is biosolids. DEP is committed to achieving 100% beneficial use of our biosolids by 2030, and at most of our facilities by 2026. And we have a 3-part plan to get there, which includes studies to identify the highest and best use of our biosolids, investments that will help improve the quality of our biosolids, and also innovations in contracting that will allow vendors to build capacity to post-process our biosolids into in-demand products that will offset the use of other less sustainable products. Our studies so far have indicated the land application is the highest and best use of the biosolids because it does recycle all of the nutrient contact back into the land. And our biosolids are routed to a range of end products such as landscaping, agriculture, and also mine reclamation and ecosystem restoration. Next slide. Okay, no, I'm short on time. So just wanted to just make a quick note here that, in addition to what I've already mentioned, DEP is also tracking next generation uses of, the anaerobic digestion process outputs, and, just trying to always look for where there's demand for less sustainable materials, being able to convert our, the endpoints of our anaerobic digestion system into bioproducts that will have a real demand and kind of offset those less sustainable products. Next slide. Just about scalability. So DEP has capacity to co-digest a significant portion of the city's organics. At Newtown Creek, the facility that we're already doing co-digestion, we can actually take up to 500 tons per day of material. We're currently taking in between 150 and 200 tons per day. We are building new digesters. I mentioned this earlier at Hunts Point. In 2026, those digesters will be complete, and we'd be able to take in about 250 tons per day of capacity of food waste and yard waste organics. And then by 2031, we'll complete all of the construction and would be able to take up to 1,000 tons per day. That is a really large number. We're not saying that that's what we're going to take, but we are saying that there is a lot of potential within our infrastructure, and there is additional capacity at our other WRFs. We just need to understand, kind of where there's need and kind of be able to unlock that capacity. We are issuing a request for expression of interest to determine interest from the vendor community in bringing us organics, doing that pre-processing for us and bringing us organics. And as part of that too, we really are trying to look into how can we most sustainably transport this material around instead of having trucks kind of going all over New York City, instead seeing if there's other more sustainable, less intrusive ways. And very last slide, which is kind of an important one.
Sorry.
It's okay, I could just talk about it. So we are also, we've just kicked off in April a citywide organic study, which is a comprehensive and integrated planning. There it is, yes, planning study. It's groundbreaking, right? This is the first study of its kind that takes a holistic look at all of New York City's organic waste streams. So it's food waste, it's yard waste, it's biosolids, it's parkland waste, kind of looking at all of this together and then trying to figure out, kind of what are where's existing capacity, where should we have more capacity, what types of products can we make from this material? And we're, there's also, we're compiling leading information on organics case studies from other municipalities, trying to understand kind of, what others are doing out there. And it's to identify, collection, pre-processing, primary end uses, final end uses, just so we make sure that we're not, producing, oversupplying one particular material, but instead always having a market, sending our material into a market where there's going to be a real demand. And another key part of this study, it's going to go for about 1.5 years, is that there's stakeholder engagement. We really want to ensure that the way this is a big transformation that the city is undergoing, and we want to make sure that we do this in a just way. So we want to make sure that all of the environmental justice considerations are included in, in both stakeholder engagement and in facility siting recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was so informative. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sandy to start the panel discussion.
All right, thanks, Claire, and good evening, everyone. Good to see so many of you here. You all have so many questions and thoughts, and I know this is a very passionate group of folks. So just a couple of things to note. I just kind of, if I put answered live in the Q&A, it's because I'm kind of mashing it into a theme with other questions that might have been similar to yours. So one of the themes that is coming up quite a bit in the chat is around kind of the quality and application of compost versus this digestate or biosolid coming out of anaerobic digestion. Frank touched on this a bit, but there was an ask about the safety and quality of New York City generated compost for farming. There was a concern raised about land application of what's coming out of the digester eggs. I thought maybe Justin, you could touch on the quality of New York City made compost. And then maybe Jane, if you, or Frank, anybody can hop in obviously, but want to touch on kind of the safety of the digestate. There was a question in particular about the PFAS. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Andy. With the community composting, we're definitely producing some of the best compost available. I mean, this is from the head of Queens Horticulture at Parks Department. Like, he won't use other people's compost, so he uses ours, and we're producing it at that scale, for the purpose of putting it back into greening the city. So that's an important part of what we're doing, and we're not doing it at this massive scale, so we're able to do that, and we're able to be really careful about the kind of compost we're making. And I think that is a sort of a question. As I want to really thank Jane for coming and talking about what DP is looking at. It's great to have someone at the city who's ready for engagement and like stakeholder and seeking out stakeholder input. I really appreciate that. Because I do think there's a lot of passionate New Yorkers who've been through the community composting, have been really energized and excited and spent a lot of time and effort composting and getting compost going in their community. So it's a really interesting time for us to try to figure out next steps and how we can keep that community scale going and keeping people engaged, but also try to hit those climate goals for the city. So we have a lot of planning to do.
Yeah, Sandy, I can answer the questions regarding PFAS. So PFAS is a worldwide issue. Okay, it's everywhere. It's in our soils, it's in our water, it's in our blood, and it starts at the very top part of the faucet, which is chemical companies that purposely put PFAS in for all the number of reasons, for mainly to repel water on your rain jackets, in your cosmetics, in your ketchup. So PFAS is everywhere. There's over, I think, 12,000 different types of PFAS chemicals that are out there. And I think that the answer is to stop it at the faucet first. And composting facilities, biosolids, AD plants, landfills, and drinking water plants are all passive receivers of PFAS. We don't put PFAS in compost. We don't put it in biosolids. We don't put it's coming in from a lot of different areas. So, first order of business, just like anything else, is, if you have a monster, you cut it off at its head, and that's what needs to happen. Now, as far as levels that affect health, EPA is not totally ruled on that. They have banned two substances, PFOS and PFOA, and those particular substances are not manufactured, and they haven't been manufactured probably for the last 25 years. And we're seeing that lower levels of those particular chemicals in human blood over the past 25 years. So reduction in creating it, managing it upstream is the best thing to do, and to continue monitoring for these things as we get better with our science. We don't know what plant uptake is in PFAS in our soils. We don't know, we can control PFAS by filtering it in liquids through reverse osmosis and charcoal filtration. In solids, it's a totally different story. There's no technology that's currently out there. So that's my my PFAS story for you all.
Thanks for taking that, Frank. I really appreciate that. That was a really great overview. I just wanted to add, that New York State has come out with draft guidance for PFAS in wastewater and biosolids. And they're following with what it's commonly known as the Michigan model, where they looked at they took concentrations of PFAS in biosolids and in wastewater from all of their wastewater treatment plants. And what they found is that the systems that are receiving just municipal waste has a kind of a baseline ambient number, and then those that have industrial users that have Dow or DuPont or paper mills that actively apply PFAS, or if they have military bases that do a lot of firefighting drills, that they had an order of magnitude to 2 orders of magnitude higher PFAS concentrations. And most of the stories that you hear about PFAS are those types of biosolids. And so what New York State is requiring is that all biosolids be tested, and it depends, if they're falling within that regular municipal range, which is what's considered ambient, then that's kind of what they're considering an acceptable level. And then the ones, if they're finding higher concentrations, then we should be looking upstream to find out who are the industrial users that are actually sending all of this PFAS wastewater to the wastewater treatment plants. And then what Michigan found is that they were able to identify an awful lot of them. And they, then ran the wastewater through granulated activated carbon, and they were able to see, in all cases over 90%, but in most cases a 99% reduction in PFAS concentrations. It was able to bring the overall biosolids concentrations at the receiving wastewater treatment plant down to the municipal level.
Thank you for that. So much information. I know we're going to be on a learning journey as a city for quite a bit of time. There were a lot of questions about the cost of the program, enforcement, and schedule. So I just wanted to do a quick primer on kind of where we're at. Councilmember Hanif's bill, which is the mandatory curbside collection bill, is basically a codification of the mayor's program that was announced earlier this year. So Queens started last year. They paused for the winter. They started back up in March. Brooklyn will start in October, and then it'll be followed by Staten Island, Bronx, and then Manhattan will be the last. So everything will be covered by the end of next year, basically beginning of 2025, if you want to think about it like that. There was a cost about, will this raise your taxes? No, this not singularly, this alone does not raise your taxes. But the cost of the program is about 23 million for next fiscal year, coming up in next fiscal year, and then 24 million in 2 years, and then it will shoot up higher in some of the out years because scaling up, and there might be needs for additional personnel, things like that. So while this program does cost money to get it going and to sustain, it also theoretically is supposed to bring down some of our export costs. So some of that is yet to be seen. And then in terms of enforcement, it'll be enforced the same way you're required to recycle at the household level now. So it's going to be just the way our trash is enforced now for the residential sector. So I hope that clarifies. There were some questions about when it comes to budgeting and how the city is kind of positioning itself with this program, questions about the future of community composting and food scrap drop-offs. And Justin, I thought, or Dior, anyone wanted to kind of think about a vision or express like a couple ideas of what you all are thinking about in terms of the future of that. And then Frank, I know you might have a national bird's eye view on how other cities that have collection programs and the strength or evolution of their community composting programs.
You want me to start?
Either or, Frank
Okay,
or Justin,
yeah.
or Dior.
So
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about the budget, right? So think about the cost of what it's costing New York City to export trash, right? What's the heaviest portion? Okay, food scrap, right? What generates the methane? Food scrap. Okay. What's the carbon footprint of trucking all that, barging it, putting it on trains, and sending it to Virginia and Pennsylvania or wherever else they send it to be landfill. So there's a huge cost and there's a huge carbon footprint. So these programs should pay for themselves. Okay. Community composting is really important for what I said earlier, and that is touch point with humans and under the understanding that what came from the earth needs to return to the earth. Okay, we've missed that whole connection's gone. So that's really important, I think. And I think the community composting should be a piece of all the methods we just talked about. Composting can be done in small scale and like I said, medium scale, be done in cover, in vessel. There's a lot of different options. I think the city should look at all of them. I think you start at what they started with, the drop-off points. One thing good about community collection and there's a sorting and separation that occurs because you put eyes on it. So that's important from a contamination. And when I talk about contamination, I'm talking about stuff that you can see: glass, plastic, non-compostable materials. So I think that there's a place for definitely everything. And I think by taking it slow and having it really planned, the successful cities that have had low contamination rates have done a really, really good job of public outreach. I would say go to Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's a really good one to look at and see. They have curbside collection there. It's both urban and suburban. They did a lot. I mean, New York City has so many different ethnic groups. You think about the language barrier, right? They did a really good job on that. They really marketed it on social media, on radio, on TV, on door hangers. They did a lot of that. Some of the case studies you can find on our website if you go to just do a word search for Target Organics, and you can see a lot of the stuff on there. So, the future, it's coming. It's just that, we don't want to jump into this and spend a lot of money on gray pipe solutions if we can do a mix of both gray pipe and green pipe solutions. And that's, it's just like anything else. I mean, don't jump the gun, take it slowly, monitor what you do, track your data. And then when you track your data, you'll be able to prove your point on the finance side. It's definitely going to pay for itself, probably threefold over.
I'll jump in really quickly. Thank you for that, Frank. That's actually kind of the point that I wanted to make as well, right? Is that the beautiful benefit about community composting is that we do have a whole lot lower contamination, but the way that residents are connected to the process is really the most impactful. I had somebody who came in for a site visit at BK Rot, and they were like, I like going to drop off my food scraps. I get to meet my neighbors. I get to talk to other people. It brings a different kind of energy. And that's what we're trying to say, right? Like living in a city environment, we are already disconnected from nature and land in ways that people who grow up in rural and suburban environments have access to. So now you have an opportunity of connecting food, right, to a full circular process back to healthy soil. You then have the opportunity to even bring in young people into the conversation. I have young people that I work with in the Bronx where they helped us to sift. At first, they were like, I don't want to touch it. And then they were like, I love the worms. So when you understand that this becomes a benefit for young people who also may be able to explore STEAM related fields, right? Community composting, and it's not just about, again, to Jane's point, it's not a competition. It's around how do we actually recognize what aspects need to be kind of working together in order to make this happen. But I think the true benefit at the crux of everything is the people, and we lose sight of that in a lot of things that become industrialized and a lot of things that kind of become commodified. We lose the essence of people coming together. And New York City is such a melting pot of different cultures. And you have people who have talked about composting, calling it a bait bed. Some people call it other things. Like there are so many different cultural ways that we can share stories around composting and composting piles. So I just think that there's a way that the education component piece too, you want people to participate. You already have people saying that they don't want to do it already now, right? But when you bring and you incentivize people in a particular way, when you bring their kids into it, right, to have to enter this conversation, when you're actually connecting them back to the soil, which is really the livelihood, right, of how we're living, and a lot of what our sort of sustainable initiatives are based on, the soil has to be alive, the soil has to be healthy. And with New York City, a lot of it's contaminated. So the more that we try to support programs that teach folks about the importance of this, as well as using these same materials locally, that's really the benefit, right? Is that it doesn't have to travel very far. It's able to be produced locally. And to that point around like in-vessel systems, there are so many different ways that we can figure out how to build up the infrastructure, whether it's micro scaled, whether it's mid-scale, whether we figure out how to work with, more land outside of the city. But the point is that we need to be able to exhaust fully what the options really are for community composters. And then at which point start thinking about the different levels of processing this material. So I just want to just like emphasize that the community piece here is the piece that cannot be forgotten, because you also want the residents to participate. And if the residents have some sort of incentive to participate, then we're going to be doing something great for New York City as it relates to even like, we have a lot of climate resilience planning that's coming down the line, right? So we're going to need our soils to be a whole lot stronger. We're going to need a whole lot more innovative approaches. And that's going to come when you bring people to the place where the activity is actually happening and be able to have those conversations. So that's all I'll say.
Thanks, Stuart. That was great, as usual. But so what I think one of the things that Claire brought up too, which I think is really key too, and you just touched on, is the green infrastructure needs of the city and using that local composting to get there. Because it's, one of the things that, Lower East Side Ecology Center, I saw one of the questions about them having to move. And they did have to move, and then they brought in soil. The contractor brought in soil from somewhere else to make topsoil on the East Side resiliency plan. And they had a whole, community-run organization to make topsoil right there, and it got moved out, unfortunately, and the contractor brought in soil. So just like there is an obvious need, and we see that as we're doing street tree care. You're working in community gardens, you see the need for better soil, and there's such a, I think in being creative around and trying not to burden other communities with that, is the approach we have taken with, community composting, is trying to set it up in the communities that are producing the food waste and composting and getting it right back out. And the communities, like, we can't make enough compost during the spring, it flies out the door, and we have to turn people away, even though we're making, we're composting, 2 million pounds a year. It's like, we can't make enough. So that shows the demand, and the demand seems to be growing as people become more aware of the value of compost. Just like in also the green infrastructure story, someone was just telling me about how their super was complaining about water pooling outside their apartment, and they brought in a bunch of compost that we dropped off, and it absorbed all the water. Like when next rain, there was no pooling because the compost absorbed it. And the super was like, all of a sudden, he had no idea what compost was, but then he was a convert. He was like, oh, it absorbed the water. I don't have a gross pool of water outside the apartment building now on my lawn. So there's so many ways it connects all of us to the community. And I really feel like there's, we can continue to be creative the way the city has been creative in supporting it in the past years.
I always get that comment about, are we going to make too much? What are we going to do with it? And, New York City has procurement offices, and they have procurement guidelines. They need to procure New York City compost. Okay. And it's used on construction projects and green roofs and everywhere. So, close the loop.
Yeah, that's that kind of, building a in-city market for the compost being produced is like an old and perhaps timely conversation now that we'll be collecting so much of it. There's a couple more questions that, a lot of the interest here is around anaerobic digestion and kind of how that's going to scale. There is a simple, like, kind of foundational question of, is there a difference between methane generated in a landfill and methane created with your through the digestion process?
So it's similar, right? I mean, in that they're both processes. Like, so in the landfill, methane is being created, but all of that is just being emitted directly to the atmosphere, right? In an anaerobic digestion system, it's a controlled tank, right, where methane is also being produced, but it's all captured, right? And so then all of that captured methane, I mean, it's a fuel, and so all of that that methane gas could then be used for, any type of combustion application. And it's a direct replacement for fossil natural gas.
And one of kind of a spin-off question of that is, could anaerobic digestion potentially be like a hyper local solution for utilities? Maybe I guess in my mind, I was imagining that question and thinking about smaller little ADs across the city, but maybe you could speak to any visions of scaling.
Yeah, I mean, within our own infrastructure, we are looking at, who our neighboring facilities are, because we're often kind of in industrial areas. Is there potential for, for us to send our biogas to the Brooklyn Navy Yard cogen, right, which produces steam for the Con Ed steam system. There's something that we've spoken to them about, and kind of we're trying to figure out like how we could route biogas without routing it through the natural gas grid. But then there's also, there could be potential for having kind of smaller, kind of food waste or organics only AD systems throughout the city. I would caution a little bit that those really do need to be maintained. We monitor, we operate and monitor our anaerobic digestion systems 24/7, and so just sometimes you get a little bit nervous when others want to build them, and if they need to make sure that they're being monitored and maintained, kind of in a really thoughtful way. Especially, sometimes a building might want to have one in their basement, and then they sell that building, and we want to make sure that the new owners will also handle it with with care, because it is producing a flammable gas, and so it's just kind of something to keep in mind, right? And leaks, I see that's in the comments, right? There's concerns about leaks, that all of this infrastructure really needs to be maintained. You don't want to have leaky anaerobic digestion systems, because that's kind of starts to defeat the purpose of actually doing anaerobic digestion in the first place.
And then this might be for the community composters. There's a couple questions in the chat about rat mitigation. And I know for us, one of the big selling points was, getting the food out of bags that sit on the curb all night was a big selling point of this program. So, from your point of view, will this program, curbside collection, help with rat mitigation?
I think to yours, thanks.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm like taking out my daughter's hair. Absolutely. I was going to say, Justin, do you want to say the one? Really, it's like a no-brainer. And that's kind of like what we're saying, right? If you keep the food waste out of the trash, you don't feed the rats. It's like, it's really just directly to the point. And because they're in these enclosed containers, granted, some people are really concerned about, well, what if the containers are not closed properly? These are all things that do have a human error. That's correct. But I would say that that's 10 times better than thinking about a cat opening up a black bag and then the rats coming to feast on it, and then the roaches and everything else that comes from it, right? So I think that, again, this puts the responsibility back on us as residents, back on us as consumers, to say that, honestly, like if I see things in the street, like I'll close it. That's just me, because I love this work. But at the end of the day, this becomes accountability for us as a whole, as a city. Nothing's going to be 100%, nothing's going to be foolproof. But at the end of the day, this is a whole lot better than the bags, and it's a step up. And maybe there's a way that there can be a better bin. Maybe there's something that can grow in the future. But I think the reality is that this is the step in the right direction. And then I haven't seen any issues with any rodents with the brown bins when they're closed properly and handled properly. So I absolutely, this definitely can get rid of the rodents.
Yeah. I would also say, odors are a big issue. They attract vermin. So whether it be flies or whether it be, rats. So if you can control the odor, and by having sealed containers, that's important. And then when you're at these community I've been to Red Hook, and capping your windrows with a lot of carbon prevents the odor and acts as a biofilter, and you don't have that issue. And of course, larger facilities have biofiltration there. So, but as far as curbside, I think that probably it will help the vermin problem in the city.
Yeah, that's the point, definitely. I mean, I think it's the same ways people are always asking, oh, it's going to smell more, but it's the same garbage. It's just in a better container. So it's no different than what we're putting out now. We're just trying to be more careful about getting the rat food out of the other waste.
And less
Awesome.
plastic too.
Claire, how are we doing on time? I can't tell because I'm looking at the two different chats. So
We are at time, but if you
Okay.
want to take a last question or so, I think most people would be okay with that. Or
Yeah,
anything to
I
wrap
mean,
it up.
most of the, to be fair, all of these, most of these questions are really deep diving into the digestate and, you know, what will come out of these. And I think that is going to be something we need to spend a lot of time on as in a learning process. So I think they're just a little bit in the weeds for me to pull up for the last couple minutes, but maybe if all of the panelists want to say where they can reach out to you, or there's a lot of questions, like some foundational questions about how can I set up a community composting site, or where can I get local New York City compost, or where can I find more information? Maybe we could do like a round of, you know, where folks can find you.
Sure. Do you want to start that, Justin?
Yeah, you can email me at justin@bigreuse.org, and I can direct you for the local, how to start local composting sites and where to get compost. We've been giving away a lot, and the city's been giving away a lot. So, but yeah, please reach out, justin@bigreuse.org.
Yeah, this is Frank. You could reach me. The best way to reach me is just go to our website, and it's compostingcouncil.org. There's a bunch of information on everything from small scale all the way up to large scale composting, a lot of information on compost use. I would recommend you go to our Target Organics hub. If you're in a startup mode, that's a good place to go. And then on community composting side, ISLR is a big, they have a lot of information on their website about startups. We have a community composting forum. We've done that with them at our conference every year. Our conference was in January in California. Next year it's going to be in Florida. So it's on the East Coast. So when you want to get out of the cold, come down to Florida in January.
Jane, do you?
Yeah, so you can email me. I dropped my my email address in the chat. It's not quite as straightforward as Justin's or Frank's, but it's jgajwani@dep.nyc.gov. We also, on the DEP website, we have a resource recovery page. I was actually just trying to find the link to it, but maybe we could send that out afterwards. And it kind of explains a lot about our program. And honestly, like, we're always willing to talk about this. You know, it's great that there's so much interest in kind of what the city is doing with its organics. We're delighted that the city is you know, kind of diverting so much material. You know, we think that we can be part of that solution, but understand that, like, we have this hidden infrastructure that not everybody is aware of. You know, and so we'd like to have open and frank conversations about it and hear everybody's concerns, and you know, that can also play into the overall citywide organic study as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I just wanted to make a plug for some of the upcoming ways to participate in things. Number one, just highlighting that the Zero Waste Act had a number of things in there. One was community recycling centers, 2 per borough, which is a big deal. So what that will look like, you know, your advocacy, your input would be really great to have. We also have the solid waste management plan that's going to be coming up over the next year. And so a lot of space and time for public input. So raising these questions about AD, raising these questions about composting, and also focusing on prevention of waste generation. We just closed out a state legislative cycle where we failed to pass an extended producer's responsibility bill, which would have really incentivized responsible production. So there's a lot more work to be done. I think, you know, this program's gonna roll out for a couple of years. It's gonna take a while for the uptick. I know that all of the work that so many of you do is going to lend itself and be directly responsible for so many people participating. But we're definitely on this learning journey, and we need the infrastructure, we need the outreach, we need the education, all of that will still be ongoing and probably will be ongoing forevermore. So looking forward to, you know, on the legislative end and the budgeting cycle, and really providing opportunities for folks to engage and really lift your voices. So I'm gonna kick it back over to Claire and just want to thank you all for inviting me to be here with you.
Yes, thanks everybody. That was a great discussion. And I think, yes, if I leave you with anything, it's like we need everything and we need more of everything. And my initial slide, I saw someone who worked at the compost project worried about less funding for community compost. I was just kind of alluding to some projections a few years out. Community composting could well be a very strong part of the future, and we would all love it to be. So all have to keep involved, all have to keep ensuring that it's the best solution. And yes, the community outreach and advisory committee for the solid waste plan for organics is a great place that we can all hope to stay involved. So thank you everybody for coming. We will be sending out the slides and recording. Thank you all the panelists, and yes,